Hello and welcome to the France 24 debate. Tonight, as results come in from elections in Iran, we're looking at what this vote has changed and what it spells for the future of Iran, both domestically in terms of its power balance and economy and on the international scene. Joining me on the panel here in the France 24 debate studio tonight, we've got Nigel Coulthard. He's the president of Cercle Iran Économie, a discussion forum, and the author of Iran, Hussein's Dilemma, which traces the history of Iran from the 1970s to the present day. And he's a former president of the Alstom Group in Iran. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. We've also got Nusabeh Amiri, who's the editor of Ruse Online, a pro-reform online newsletter published by Iranian pro-human rights advocates. Thank you very much for being with us. On the line from Oxford in the UK, we're also joined by Payam Akavan. He's a visiting fellow at Oxford University and the founder of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Centre. He's previously also worked for the UN and International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there. And we've also got on set with us Delphine Minoui, an award-winning Franco-Iranian journalist who was based in Iran for 10 years. She's now the correspondent for the Figaro newspaper in Turkey. We're lucky to have her with us in Paris tonight. She's also published a book on Iran. In English, it's titled A Letter from Tehran, published in a few months in English. Thank you very much indeed for being with us too. And you can also join in the debate at home if you're following us on Twitter. Send in your comments and questions. The hashtag is hashtag F24debate. We're going to start off, though, by taking the temperature on the ground in Iran. Our reporter, Sanam Shantieh, is in Tehran for us. She's been following the campaign and these elections for us. Sanam, now we're getting results coming in. From what we know so far, there are gains there for reformists and moderates. Talk a bit about, though, the elections which you've been following. I mean, what was the enthusiasm like? What were people telling you as they went into these elections? Did they see them as a moment for change?
I was actually in Iran back in 2012 for the previous round of parliamentary elections, and the ambience was very different. It felt like at the time there was what we call voter fatigue, and the reason for that is because those were the first elections that we had in the aftermath of 2009. Iranians felt like suddenly economically they'd hit a wall, and it was of course under Iran's previous hardline President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. However, this time I was going to campaigns held by supporters of both conservatives and reformists, and it really felt like people were more enthusiastic. For those that had actually voted for President Hassan Rouhani, they wanted to come in, they wanted their voices to be heard, so that Iran's current more moderate-thinking president can actually carry out and implement the policies that he introduced back in 2013. For the conservatives, however, who are essentially opposed to a détente with the international community, they are very concerned and cautious because they feel that Iran could be losing its independence as there's an influx of foreign companies into the country. They also wanted to have their voices heard. So both sides were telling me that we will go to those ballot boxes. But the one thing that they really had in common was the fact that they wanted to see an improvement when it comes to the country's economy, which actually under Hassan Rouhani has seen some level of improvement. Inflation has dropped from 40 to 15%.
All right, we'll leave it there, I think, Sanam. Thanks very much for now. Apologies for the slight sound problems there on that connection to Tehran. So let's kick off the debate tonight. I want to ask you, Nusabeh Amiri, is a wind of change blowing over Iran? Can we go that far, or is it too early to speak like that?
Well, I guess it's too early, but the thing is that we should see this vote as a no vote to Khamenei, in fact to the hardliner. Now we have to wait to see what will happen afterwards, because some of these members of parliament who've been chosen, they are independent. Some of them are principalists, and the other who are supposed to be reformists, they are not that much reformists that used to be. So we have to wait for the result.
Okay, yeah, a lot of unknowns about this, aren't there, Delphine Minoui? I mean, we saw candidates going into this election. 6,000 candidates were actually not allowed to register by the Guardian Council. I mean, how much can these elections really bring about reform?
You know, that's why the come out, the victory of the reformists is specifically interesting. So far, it looks like they managed to reach 30% of the seats in the parliament, which is at least 3 times what they used to have in the previous parliament. So it's a big sign, especially because many of them, the key figures, were not allowed to run. They were blocked by the Guardian Council. So I see it as a message of change, a message of hope. And another point is big hardliners have been kicked out. I mean, among them, hardliners who were totally against the nuclear deal. One of them was known and quoted as saying he would bury in cement some of the nuclear negotiators if a deal was reached. Those people have been pushed away. So it's a sign of more moderation, I think. This parliament, indeed, as Nushabe was saying, there's a lot of new figures. We don't really know who they are. They are independent, moderate people. It's a time of people who are into pragmatism more than reforms or conservative values. It's, I would see it as a more nuanced parliament, people who are more into fixing the problems of the country rather than getting stuck into an ideological debate.
OK, let me put that to Payam Akavan, who's joining us from Oxford tonight. Would you agree with those comments there, that it's a sign of change in Iran, a move towards pragmatism, or are these merely going to be cosmetic changes?
Well, the idea of reform in Iran is a relative concept. It has to be measured against 40 years of totalitarianism and repression. If the question is whether the Iranian people want far-reaching change, yes, the answer is clearly yes, and they've exploited what little space they have in these carefully managed elections in which the candidates are handpicked for their allegiance to the Islamic Republic and to its tenets. So in that sense, yes, there is a wind of change, but I think we have to be skeptical about how far the regime is really willing to go. I think that the nuclear deal and the limited changes which we see in these elections have to be seen as a measure of self-preservation to ensure the survival of the regime. We've seen this before. We've seen it during the presidency of Mr. Khatami. We saw it during the brief uprising of the Green Movement. So is this just a way of creating the illusion of progress, or will there be meaningful change on the issues that really matter to people? Economic reform, environmental issues, civil and political rights, greater respect for human rights, the end of the alarming rate of executions, the repression of minorities, the imprisonment of political prisoners. So is there room for hope? Well, against what we've seen in the past, there is room for hope. But I would be skeptical and wait and see if this election translates into meaningful change. And finally, we have to bear in mind that the institutions in Iran that still have the most power are unelected institutions, in particular the Revolutionary Guards, that have very, very tight control over the country and that managed during the Khatami presidency to sabotage all attempts at reform.
Yeah, this is a very important point, and one I want to come on to in just a moment. But first, let me put that point to Nigel Coulthard there. Now, obviously, you're familiar with Iran over many decades. From an economic point of view, do you think this is self-preservation we're seeing by an Iranian regime, knowing that it's got to have a way out of the economic situation that it got itself to and allowing a certain amount of reform?
Well, it will certainly help Rouhani push through a number of reforms that he needs to re-establish a working economy that basically was completely degraded under Ahmadinejad from 2005 to 2013. He needs to push through obvious measures in terms of governance, in terms of cutting through bureaucracy and levels of corruption, to bring it back to a position that existed in the early 2000s. So I'm essentially an economic observer. I wouldn't call it window dressing. I would call it an essential step to regain the economic situation of Iran, because it has gone through a very dire situation over the last 12 years.
Nevertheless, we can imagine, can't we, that Hassan Rouhani, if he doesn't have a majority in Parliament, as it looks, or even with allies having a majority in Parliament, will have to advance very cautiously, won't he, in order not to antagonise various factions. So do you think we're going to see meaningful reforms?
Well, I suppose if there's anyone that can do it, it will be Rouhani, because he is essentially a conservative politician. And he has and will continue always to weigh up the pros and the cons. He's probably the best example of a pragmatist that we have today.
All right, I want to move on, Nushtabe Amiri, and bring up comments there made by Per Makavan in Oxford that whether the reformists and moderates, whether or not they've made gains, key institutions in Iran, the Revolutionary Guards, the Guiding Council, I mean, they have a huge amount of influence on what can actually be done. I mean, therefore, is there hope for reform and change from your point of view?
There's hope always. I mean, we cannot go on without hoping. But the reality is that what Payam said is very correct, because during the Khatami's presidential, we had the same situation and even better. We had a parliament which was reformist, really reformist, and the president was reformist. But see what has happened. Because of the Khomeini is there, and the judiciary power and the thing like that. And apart from that, we have to see it, the structure of the regime. So it's now there are people who are gaining million and million of money, and they have all over the country. All the economy is in fact run by them. So. It's a struggle. It's a very strong struggle, and I think what people show is mostly their unhappiness towards this totalitarian regime. I'm not talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'm talking about the Islamic regime, which wants to keep the country under these circumstances. They accepted the nuclear deal, mostly because it was the decision of the regime. It wasn't that's why Rouhani managed to do that. But I don't know in the other fields, like the freedom of expression or economy or the thing like that, what will happen later. But in any case, it will be very, very dangerous and very a challenge which can be changed to so many different things.
Yeah, I want to get your view on that, Delphine Mouni, because you were in Iran leading up to 2009 when, of course, we saw the foiled revolution, the Green Revolution, which was repressed. I mean, do you think there's any room for manoeuvre here at all with people pushing for substantial change to the state structure itself?
You know, under Ahmadinejad, I mean, Iran was just one color. And many Iranians used to say it was the dark color. The president was an ultra-conservative, the parliament was conservative. I mean, the key position, the key institutions were run by conservative people. Now, at least, it's a diverse parliament, and there is room for debate. And that's why there is hope. Let me give you the example. I mean, 3 Kurdish parliament members have been elected, for instance. Among them, two of them are women. Let's not forget the women. I think it's more than 14 women who've been elected in this parliament. And one of them, I mean, I don't know if you saw this video, which went really viral on the social network. One of them was talking in front of the camera in English, which is very interesting too, saying that she would consider the non-mandatory veil for Iranian women. A veil is obligatory since the revolution in '79 and since the clerics took over. So just this sentence that she had, for me, is a mini revolution somehow.
And you'd agree with that, Nushtabe?
Well, I do agree with Delphine, because there are the potentially speaking, it's like that. Each time that people come and vote, it's mostly for saying to Khomeini that we don't want the system to go on like that. And it included the style of life, the individual freedom, the freedom of expression, all these things. I mean, there are the possibilities. And sometimes, in spite of all the pressure, people find a way to talk loudly. But I'm always worried because during the Khatami, we had the same situation. And look what happened. All the newspapers were closed. Lots of journalists were in prison. Still, we have lots of journalist prisoners. So I'm worried, but this is the reality of the Iranian society. I just add a sentence that Shah, during the first years of the last years of his period, he came to TV and he said, I heard the voice of your revolution, talking to the people. I mean, right now, if I were in the place of Khomeini, I would come to TV and say to the people, I heard your voice for changing. But I don't know if he listened it and if he does it. And that makes it very complicated and delicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we go to a break for the news headlines, let me put this to Payam Akavan in Oxford. Delphine Minuit was saying there that there is change here. There are different colours on the political spectrum. And talking about that video in which we saw a female MP talking about the right to wear the veil and even questioning that, are those not signs of reform for you?
No, I agree with my friends that there is a signs of hope, but I perhaps think that the reason is not because of the Islamic Republic, it's because of the people of Iran. It's because the regime is facing the reality of a population that's overwhelmingly youthful, highly educated, glued to satellite television, internet savvy, that demands change. So I don't think that the Islamic Republic just woke up and all of a sudden decided to make life better for its people. It's realized, perhaps along the lines of the Chinese model, that if at least it cannot improve the economic well-being of its people, it cannot continue to rule indefinitely through terror and violence. So basically, there are the hardliners who believe in maintaining the existing structures through violence and intimidation, and then there are the so-called pragmatists that believe in keeping the regime in place through economic growth. But at the end of the day, all of the changes that we witness are because the regime is left with no choice. And it was only in 2009, just 7 years ago, that millions of people poured out in the streets of Iran demanding far-reaching change, and certainly the regime has not forgotten about that, which is really a nightmare scenario. It's the worst nightmare for the regime, which supposedly stands on based on a populist platform and helping the poor and the downtrodden. So the regime is trying to prevent yet another uprising like 2009 through these measures.
All right, with that thought, we're going to have to leave it for a very quick break to get the news headlines here on the France 24 debate, but we'll be back very soon with the second half.